So if you watched our other video on igneous petrology and our adventures up Isitumba and that granite batholith and that fantastic Inselberg of a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about what a fantastic life the igneous petrologists have. But the metamorphic petrologists would argue otherwise, and they would say that they are way more glamorous. Irrespective of who the more or most glamorous is, it's all very, very fascinating. That was a grand adventure. So today we're talking about metamorphic petrology. What I can assure you is that it's going to be way more glamorous than those dull grey textbooks written by people who know very little about rocks and igneous rocks and metamorphic rocks in particular. So stick with me while we have a quick run through metamorphic rocks. So you all have to learn about this. It's in the school syllabus. There's that boring thing. Being a geologist, and we had to study all this, what a fantastic subject it is, and it breaks my heart when it's just a few lines in a textbook about the three rock types, igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rocks, and you think, oh my goodness me, you're really missing out on this amazing, amazing story. So I'm here to try and put that to rights. So rocks that are subjected to heat and pressure are changed. They are metamorphosed. They become something new. And that's the whole thing about metamorphic petrology and the study of metamorphic rocks. They can also be deformed due to stresses that are applied. So imagine a car hitting a tree. It all buckles and rucks up, and hopefully the driver and the passengers aren't injured, but anything in that kind of collision, or there's always some deformation that takes place, and rocks can also be subject to those kinds of things too. And geologists call that folding and faulting and shearing. And geologists who study those three things, folding, faulting, and shearing, are called structural geologists. And they work very closely with metamorphic petrologists. And so that's why these guys will say that they're way more glamorous than the igneous petrologists, because they have to understand how the rocks get distorted and metamorphosed and mashed and mangled and folded and faulted. And there's millions of books and millions of scientific papers written about all of this kind of stuff, and it really is very, very fascinating. Unraveling the tectonic history of a mountain chain, or what went on 1 billion years ago or 30 million years ago. It's fascinating stuff. So let's now take a deep dive into the underworld, because we are here to talk about metamorphic rocks, not about folding and faulting. We'll make another video about that later. So if we haven't met before, my name's Gerald Davey and I head up Rock and Sky. So our aim at Rock and Sky is to bring these amazing landscapes, rocks, geomorphological features into the classroom and bring them to life and make your lessons exciting and interesting. Trying to get away from that dull, boring textbook, sometimes written by people who don't understand these things. So I'm a geologist. I've been doing this for many years. So our mission is to dive into geography and geology and meteorology and oceanography and all those lovely things. And not only to dive into those subjects, but go on amazing adventures into the most beautiful landscapes. And so if you want to come along on this adventure, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you hit that subscribe button, please share it with your colleagues, and hit that notification button. So the deeper you go into the Earth's crust, the hotter it gets. We all know that. And deep down there's lava and melting. So temperatures increase at a rate of about 25 degrees Celsius per every kilometer that you descend. It does vary a little bit, but that's on average, an average figure for the Earth's crust. In South Africa, they've got the deepest gold mines in the world. So they go down to 4 kilometers. It's phenomenal, 4 kilometers down. Johannesburg, where most of the gold mines are, is at an altitude of about 1,700 meters above sea level. So to descend 4,000 meters takes you to what, 2,300 meters below sea level? That's amazing. It really is amazing. So anyway, the temperatures down on those South African gold mines reach 60 degrees Celsius plus. So that's phenomenal. So that increase of temperature with depth is called the geothermal gradient. So from this, we can see that with increasing depth, the temperature of the rocks increase, and at great depths in tectonic collision zones where continents collide with continents or there's subduction taking place. There's another topic that we need to talk about in another video, plate tectonics. But I think most of us are aware that, like, for instance, India colliding with Asia, and we got the formation of the Himalayas. So rocks get driven down to depth, they get buried 30, 40, 50, sometimes 70 kilometers down. And of course, the temperatures go up. Not only do the temperatures go up, but so does the pressure. So we're just going to have a quick run through just as an illustration, and there's a little bit of arithmetic involved here, but just bear with me. And you can skip through this if you don't want to go listen to it. So the density of quartz, and a mineral that you find abundantly in the Earth's crust, silica, SiO2. The specific gravity, the density of that is 2.65 grams per centimeter cubed. So if you scale it up to a meter cube, which you probably won't find in real life, but just say a quartz-rich rock, a quartzite, for instance, made up of quartz, little quartz grains, and say it's got an average density of 2.65, and you take a cubic meter of that, it's going to weigh 2.65 tons per meter cubed, or, and I'll put it another way, 2,650 kilograms in 1 cubic meter of material. So to calculate the weight, which is the force, you have to times that by the acceleration due to gravity, which is 9.8 meters per second. So you might be learning about this in physics. So if we take 2,650 kilograms and we times it by, let's just round it up to 10 meters per second, the acceleration due to gravity, we get the force. Because the formula for force is force equals mass times acceleration. So we know what the mass is, it's 2,650 kilograms, and we know what the acceleration due to gravity is, it's 10 meters per second. So we times it all by 10. So for 1 cubic meter of rock, 2,650 kilograms times by 10, we get 26,500 newtons. So that's a bit of an unwieldy number, so we divide it through by 1,000, we get a figure in kilonewtons. So we get 26.5 kilonewtons acting on 1 square meter footprint area of a cubic meter block of rock. So say we have a 1,000 meter high column of this. We times that by 1,000. So if we stacked 1,000 of these blocks of rock one on top of another, we would have a column of rock 1,000 meters high. So to calculate the weight of a 1,000 meter high column of rock, we simply multiply the weight of a single block by 1,000. Thus 26.5 kilonewtons times by 1,000 equals 26,500 kilonewtons, or 26.5 meganewtons. So to calculate the pressure acting on the footprint area of our column of rock, remember that pressure is defined as force per unit area. There's the formula P equals F over A. And we already know that our footprint area is 1 meter squared, so the pressure is 26.5 meganewtons over 1 meter squared, or more simply 26.5 meganewtons per meter squared. So now imagine a column of rock 50 kilometers high. The pressure would be 50 times higher than our 1 kilometer high column. Therefore, 26.5 meganewtons per meter squared times by 50 equals 1,330 meganewtons per meter squared. Kilonewtons per meter squared and meganewtons per meter squared can also be written as kilopascals and megapascals. So that's a simplified way of doing it. So these are phenomenally high pressures. And so if you take normal structural concrete they use in building multi-story buildings, 25 MPa concrete. So it takes a force of 25 megapascals to crush that and cause it to fail. Some rocks, if you subject them to huge pressures, they can withstand up to 400 megapascals before they fail. So if we go back to that other figure, 1,330 meganewtons per meter squared, or megapascals. And some rocks fail at 400. Well, we're exceeding the failure envelope of those rocks. But in many ways, they aren't able to fail because they're supported and surrounded by the adjacent columns of rock. So down at those very deep depths in the Earth's crust, the forces are huge, the pressures are huge, and the rocks start behaving in very weird ways. They don't burst or break, they don't fail, they start to flow and do all sorts of weird things. And of course, if you warm them up and heat them up, then it starts turning into like a hot toffee or fudge or something, and that they start to behave plastically rather than just breaking apart. Okay, so thank you for bearing with me with all the little bit of simple physics and mathematics, arithmetic. Now that we've proved the point that down at those depths we have massive, massive pressures, and we know that the temperatures can go up to really very high temperatures, to the extent that in some instances the rocks can start to melt, and then we move from the realm of metamorphic petrology into the realm of igneous petrology, because you exceed the melting point of the rock and it starts to melt. The takeaway from this is that metamorphic rocks form under high temperatures and pressures, and I've just tried to illustrate how high those pressures can be and what temperatures are required. You know, granites start to form at around 800 degrees Celsius, 850, somewhere there. So they're not that high temperatures, but it's enough to melt the rock. So we're burying them down at depth at a geothermal gradient of 25 degrees Celsius per every kilometer you go down. You can certainly dial up the temperature until the rocks start to melt. So when you subject a rock to very high temperatures and pressures, a rock comes with its original mineralogy, whatever that happens to be. And this again isn't a treatise on minerals and mineral science, but just imagine certain minerals in a rock, and if you heat them up, they actually change. If you heat them and subject them to pressure, they change, they become new minerals. In a lot of instances, the rock dries out and the waters, some minerals actually have water in them. That water gets driven out. Again, I don't want to get in too deep. But the point is, again, the takeaway from this is that the mineralogy can change. By way of analogy, let's imagine that we're baking a cake. So we take eggs and flour and sugar and butter and milk and baking powder and maybe chocolate or cocoa, and you throw it all into a mixing bowl and we mix it up in a specific order, and we pour it into a baking tin and we whack it in the oven. Well, 40 minutes later, you get a cake out of that. And I think we will all agree with those high temperatures in the oven, the product that comes out at the end is very different to the original ingredients that went into the mix. So it's that kind of analogy. When you take things and you cook them up, you can get a different product out at the end. In this case, for the cake, certainly under much lower pressure. And what also happens is that the minerals reorientate themselves. If we've got two forces operating this way and the minerals are also lying horizontal to the directions of forces, the minerals actually orientate themselves at right angles to the directions of the major principal stresses. So often in a rock, there's a mineral called mica, and we'll talk about that mineral, and I'll talk a little bit. In fact, on the igneous petrology video that I provided the link to below, I talk a little bit about micas. So the micas are flat platey minerals. I'll try and put a picture up in this video. So the micas, so we've got the principal stresses pushing from one side and one pushing from the other, equal and opposite, and the minerals reorientate themselves. And so we can get a structure developing in a metamorphic rock. And that's one of the diagnostic features. So assisted or driven by the high temperatures and pressures, the rock metamorphoses into a new kind of rock with new mineralogies and new structures. So how do we get such high temperatures and pressures? And I've alluded to this already, but collision zones, when continents collide, or subduction takes place, when a tectonic plate subducts, descends below an adjacent plate, or we get an island arc getting smeared up against some continental crust, we get crustal thickening. Crustal thickening and crustal shortening. And so that thickening, where the rocks are getting buried at depth, that's where the temperatures go up, and that's called regional metamorphism. All right, so let's get back to the deep burial aspect of things. So there's a fantastic picture of the Himalayas. And here's a cross-section through the Himalayas, and there's the reference there where I got that from. And you can see on the left-hand side, 18 millimeters per year as the Indian plate advances northwards into the Asian plate. You can see the zone of present-day uplift and maximum contraction. And that's there on the kind of left-hand third, the high Himalayan peaks and the thrusting going on there. So I don't want to get too involved in this, but there's fold defaulting and deep burial. Here's a cross-section through the Alps, computer generated. There's some lovely hand-drawn ones by Albert Heim, who was doing his work there 100 years ago. Amazing mapping that they did. And you can see the thickening of the Earth's crust there and the deep burial taking place. So without getting too much into that detail, the point is tectonic collision leads to deep burial. All right, so here's a fantastic diagram which I promised you earlier. So on the top axis, 0 to, 1,000 degrees Celsius, as I've implied, that's the temperature scale. And you often see this diagram the other way with the pressure going up, increasing on the y-axis. But in this case, and I think shows things a bit better, the temperature increases going downwards, which indicates burial. All right, so obviously on the left-hand side, increasing pressure, and on the top x-axis, increasing temperature. So you can see here in this top area, there's a process called diagenesis, and that's the process where a rock goes from, certainly a sedimentary rock, goes from being a sediment, a pile of mud, silt, sand, and that's the process that it gets welded and changed into a rock, and that's called diagenesis. So it's fairly low temperature, fairly low pressure. Increasing temperature and pressure takes, before I go any further, this is what they call metamorphic grade. So as we go increase temperature and increase pressure, we get changes in the metamorphic grade, and certain minerals appear, and they are diagnostic. And we spoke about the mineralogy changing earlier on in the video. So based on the mineralogy, you can then work out what temperature and pressure the rock was subjected to. Okay, so I'm trying to keep this fairly simple, so I hope you're still staying with me. All right, so let's just dive in here a little bit further. So increasing temperature, increasing pressure, it goes from diagenesis to zeolite, then we get another pumpelliite prehnite zone, and then again going kind of on a linear trajectory, we get green schist facies, which is, facies is, that's a particularly geological term. So it's called green schist facies, and then you get amphibolite facies and granulite facies. So those are the facies, characteristics of a particular rock. It's a kind of from a sedimentological origin. So we get green schists forming under these particular temperatures and pressures of 400 degrees Celsius down to kilobars pressure. Okay, so we're talking about megapascals and things. So the other thing is bars, other unit of pressure, bars. So again, I don't want to get into all that, but 100 kilopascals makes 1 bar. So if you want 200 kPa tire pressure, that's 2 bar. So kilobars obviously a lot larger. Staying with the program here, green schist facies increase in temperature and pressure again, we get amphibolite facies, and again, high temperature and high pressure, we get granulite facies. So that's kind of getting into like a granitic texture of the rock. Stepping back, green schist, so there's minerals like actinolite and epidote, makes the rocks go green. Amphibolites, that rock is very rich in a mineral called amphibole, and granulite, we start getting kind of a bit of a granitic, gneissic texture, lots of quartz and feldspar and those kind of things. If a rock forms under very high pressure but not such high temperatures, we get what they call blue schist facies. And there's specific minerals that form jadeite, glaucophane, those are blue minerals. And if you find those minerals in the rock, you know it's been subjected to very high pressures but not such great temperatures. And then the opposite of that is where you have, and this is all regional metamorphism. Look here, we've got 3, collisional mountain belt. This is regional metamorphism. So there you are, collisional. Again, stable continental, that also can be collisional. Accretionary prism, my goodness, I don't want to get into that. But we're getting into some deep geology here. All right, so the point is regional metamorphism when there's continents colliding, subduction taking place. But there's another kind of metamorphism called contact metamorphism. So that often happens around igneous intrusions where there's a batholith or a dike comes into contact with the surrounding rock called the country rock. That can be a shale or a mudstone or a sandstone, and it bakes the rock. Can also change the chemistry, but it's very low pressure, and that's called hornfels. So that's up here, high temperatures, but as you can see, it's not very far down on the pressure axis. So that's called hornfels. And there it's number 1. I ran away from that a couple of minutes ago. Contact thermal metamorphism. So the largest igneous intrusion on Earth, the Bushveld Igneous Complex in South Africa, I think it occupies an area of approximately 190,000 square kilometers. It's got 700 years of platinum reserves in that ore body. But there's a contact aureole around that igneous intrusion, which is up to 30 kilometers wide. So that's kind of thermal metamorphism, contact metamorphism, the Hornfels grade metamorphism that I talked about in the previous. Well, let's just go back to that slide. In this particular zone, you get this hornfels. So that's when you've got a 190,000 square kilometer igneous intrusion heating up all the surrounding rock, you are going to get some baking around the edges of that. And that's what's gone on around the Bushveld igneous complex. Oh, here's a lovely figure of the Bushveld complex. The blue being the younger rocks as per the key here, and then this is the Bushveld. Pretoria, Johannesburg is just down to the south here, and this thing, the eastern limb of it, it extends up to the north and out to the western limb. So that is where some of the world's richest platinum mines are located. Without muddying the waters, it's all very well to say those are the particular minerals in a rock that form, but if the chemistry of the rock is such, when you heat it and when you put it under pressure, if it doesn't have the right chemistry to start off with, you're not necessarily going to get those typical minerals coming out at the end. Like trying to bake a cake, you know, our cake analogy. If you just put flour and water and then stick it in the oven, you're not necessarily going to get a cake out. You are going to get something out, but the chemistry is such that you're not going to get that typical kind of metamorphic mineral assemblage that one would hope for. So it's very subtle, and that's why metamorphic petrologists might be a bit more snobby than everybody else. Going back to that glam thing. Okay, so let's not get too involved in that. Okay, so, all right, so here's another diagram which I think will assist us. And this is in a tectonic collision zone where we've got an island arc, the subducting plate being driven down below the adjacent arc. We get melting, magma rising, volcanoes. Very high pressure here, not so deep, we get blue schist facies. Here we're getting green schist facies, so the temperature and pressures are quite high, but not as high as they are down at amphibolite facies or granulite facies. And if you remember our diagram of earlier, there was that increasing gradient going down with depth and temperature. Obviously granulite facies very hot, amphibolite facies, pressure is not as high, temperature is not as high, green schist again, and we get contact metamorphism along the pipes. So that's kind of in another geological setting. So now that we have some insights into how metamorphic rocks are formed, let's take a quick look at some typical rock types that are found in the geological record. So this is very simple, and it's in the textbooks, and it's a little bit too simplified, but you have to learn it. So limestones, which are calcium carbonate, originally coral reefs, if they get metamorphosed, they turn into marbles. And you get beautiful marbles. And the Taj Mahal is made of Makrana limestone marble. Michelangelo carved beautiful, what's the name of that marble that he carved? It escapes me now, but that beautiful marble from Italy, which he carved into David and all his other wonderful works. That's a metamorphic rock. Mudstones become things called peelites. I don't know if that's in the textbook, but the metamorphic equivalent of a mudstone is a peelite. Shales become slates. Sandstones can become quartzites, and if you keep on cooking them up into that granulite phase, you can get a nice. Granites become gneisses, and basalts become amphibolites. All right, so that's a very simplified classification, but I think it's good enough now for what we're trying to do, and the ground that we have to cover in the syllabus. So I'm going to leave it there now. Kind of got some insights how metamorphic rocks form, the different grades, the different metamorphic facies depending on where they fall on that graph, temperature and pressure, and depending on where they're buried, what heat they've been subject to, the different minerals form accordingly, and those minerals are diagnostic. So we hope to go now and show you some real metamorphic rocks. I've got one here actually, but this is 1.1 billion years old. Amazing, quarter of the age of the Earth. It looks like a lump of nothing to you right at the moment, but we're going to go down, it sounds grand, into the Voth. I've called it the Voth. The Valley of 1,000 Hills. Valley of 1,000 hills, but Voth. And we're going to look at some of these wonderful examples of metamorphic rocks. They're gneisses down there. There are these, this is a charnocite, but I'm not getting into that. And there's folding and all sorts of interesting things. In fact, there's a bit of a longer drive, probably a couple of hours from where I live. There are some wonderful folds to be seen. So we might go and take a look at that. It all takes time and money. So how do we put it? If you guys like these videos and give me the thumbs up and comment on it, which I would really appreciate, and say, yeah, we'd love to see some more videos on this kind of stuff, and go on a journey and look at all those lovely folds down in the Natal Metamorphic province, then leave your comments below and share the video. We've already had this discussion. So yeah, so we're going to go and check out those fantastic examples of the Valley of 1,000 Hills. And then again, just in closing, please like, please share, please click that notification button, and please leave your comments. Tell us what more you'd like to see, what you'd like to learn about, what's giving you grey hairs in the teaching the syllabus, what examples you'd like to see, what landscapes you'd like to see, and we'll do our best to comply. But this isn't just a case of sitting in the studio with a laptop talking about these things. It takes time and effort and money. So to go out and look at these things, we have to go and be targeted, and it takes commitment, food, early departures, fuel in the tanks, make sure there's water, make sure the vehicle gets you there and gets you home. Batteries have to be charged, all that kind of stuff. And of course, one has to do a bit of research before we go. So if you appreciate it and if you want to be part of this adventure, please subscribe, please like, please share, and hit that notification button. Right, so that's the end of that. I will see you in the Voth, the Valley of 1,000 Hills. So looking forward to that. Until next time, take care.